I offer you these few brief thoughts, partly because my background professionally is in communications. They may or may not be directly relevant, but I hope they provide an envelope within which we can have a conversation. There is a sense that we need to have engagement. I would say we need to have a strategy for engagement. First of all, looking at the way our audience divides, whether we need to address the public at large is a subject I want briefly to discuss with you, as opposed to the public in a region, for example, the strength of UK Biobank in the Northwest at a time when lots of people are thinking about the future of the Northwest might imply that there was interesting things to say about UK Biobank activities in the context of Greater Manchester and so on. We've heard this morning about access. Clearly there's a subset of the public who are potential users of UK Biobank, and again, a strategy for engagement, communication would need to identify them. But I wonder whether engagement is a term we should be slightly careful of. It does have an affective element, which implies that we can reach into confidence and trust. And those of you who are clinicians and scientists will necessarily be slightly sort of cautious about the squidginess of such notions, which are hard to measure and certainly hard to engineer. So it might be more useful to focus on, as it were, the cognitive component of communication, talking to, trying to elicit the participation of people. I need to say some rather brutal things in a moment about the public, because there is empirical evidence about the public's level of understanding. But the kind thing to say, and it certainly is a platform on which UK Biobank has subsisted and will go forward, is that in this country, up to this point, and I have to say that because the next election may well change things, the National Health Service, publicly provided health, do create a warm, solidaristic environment within which UK Biobank fits. Many people participate in UK Biobank because they think it has to do with improving the public health, and they think of that in terms of, as it were, the brand of the NHS. However inaccurate that might be in terms of specific institutions, their thinking associates the progress of knowledge about the treatment of disease with the publicly provided National Health Service, and in the longer run future, the fate of UK Biobank and the fate of the NHS might have connection. Public don't necessarily know things. We mustn't assume too much knowledge. This comes from a recent publication by the company Ipsos Mori, which looked at knowledge in the UK about various propositions, what the public said. These are just two examples, and the level of ignorance on the part of the UK population is no greater or less, it seems, than in many other European countries. People are asked, for example, how many teenagers get pregnant, and that was a huge exaggeration, ditto people's mensuration of the immigrant population. And I use that to illustrate the way in which the public will get things wrong. The public don't know, and one mustn't make heroic assumptions about public levels of knowledge. I used to do some work for the Royal Statistical Society to try and improve public statistical literacy, the public including members of the UK Parliament's House of Commons, where understanding of probability, and I need to look meaningfully at Rory when I say people's, even GPs' understanding of probabilities around the dispensing of statins illustrates just how difficult some of these, what to scientists are basic pieces of mathematics, how difficult they are to communicate to the public. So in any propositions one's making about UK Biobank, one has to be careful not to over-assume public knowledge, either of institutions. We talked earlier about the complexities of UK Biobank's relationship with the higher education sector, or with public understanding about etiology and measurement. We know from previous work with research, not necessarily in this field but elsewhere, that you can convene focus groups, you can convene meetings, and in those meetings you can generate engagement, a warm sense of ownership, desire to improve public knowledge, but the effects of those occasions may not last for very long. People generally, when asked, tend to say, I don't mind my data being used for common benefit, but I don't want my data used for commercial exploitation. And I know that's a major theme, but it's something to bear in mind if one thinks about public attitudes. People seem to apply general tests of utility, not about themselves personally, but a sense of they need a sense of reassurance that their participation will lead to some collective benefit. People's understanding of, I just mentioned, universities isn't very large. People have vague images of folk in lab coats. They get terribly worried. I took part in a focus group recently about postgraduates having access to data because they didn't trust postgraduates. They thought they were too young to understand. And one would need to sort of encompass these contours of public attitude. Clearly, there are attributes in terms of attitude towards, to do with age. People who are getting older will necessarily be much more attuned to the possibilities that UK Biobank and other such research enterprises could bring to the amelioration of their current or prospective conditions. And I'll end, if I may, making a counterintuitive point. It's easy in these circumstances to think we ought to go enthusiastically into the project of eliciting public engagement. I'll lay the proposition before you that it might be politic for the enterprise not to be too active in, to use that phrase of Willie Whitelaw, stirring up apathy. You don't necessarily want to provoke the public into being more inquisitive and doubting than it needs to be. Now, that can sound very cynical, and I don't intend it in that way. But there clearly is a large cost attached to a very active engagement program. Yesterday, somebody mentioned all the hay. It's easy to see circumstances in which a large storm of public attention, often incredibly misinformed, gets built up, and social media can perhaps facilitate that kind of rush of public attention. And clearly, in thinking about UK Biobank, one has to, I'm sure there are plans in place to avoid that, but it's potentially a cost to a too active engagement of the public. Again, I don't want to harp on negative political futures, but it's possible we will see after the next election, we're seeing already to some extent, the rise of political parties in this country which take a populist view, whose attitudes towards science, the scientific endeavour and research may not be enlightened. And one needs, in one's engagement, one's talking to the public, to be aware that there is a large core now of public opinion which, to use a blunt word, is reactionary. However, there is a lot to do, and you do it already, to try and avoid problems. And again, I don't want to sort of sound too negative, but it's important, I think, to have in place a sense of what the public does know, could know, and might usefully not know. UK Biobank engages with a series of segmented audiences, long way short of that wide public, and that engagement, including engagement with funders, could well be as effective and necessary as attempting some grand project of better informing the public at large, of whom clearly participants are a very special subgroup, the public at large, about its activities. Thank you.